Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Crone, dedicated to hay and forage growers. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Scott Courtright from Courtright Enterprises in Moses Lake, Washington. We'll hear more about his family's operation shortly, but in short, they are hay exporters, living the dream right now, no doubt. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, John. Yeah, thank you. Yes, a dream for sure. At least it's a new start, a new year. So we're on January 2nd, so that's good.
Yeah.
We have a new year for sure.
So tell us about your operation and the history. I've had the good fortune to, you and I serve on the Hay Growers Board together, so we get to interact quite a bit, but not everybody knows the history.
Yeah, we're located in Moses Lake, Washington. So family's been here for a long time. Originally, family's history is in the cattle business. My grandfather had the feedlot and ranches around Washington, and that in the 80s, like many businesses, that whole operation unwound and went away. And that's when my dad kind of entered into the hay business, was in the late 80s and early 90s. He custom harvested hay all over the basin and actually ran an export facility for Midwest agri-commodities that was in Moses Lake. So he did that for a couple of years and operated the facility. And then we custom harvested hay till 2003, and we put our first, 100-wood press in Moses Lake, and then have been operating in many different fashions since then. So we have a facility located in Moses Lake that we've been running for the last 7 years, I think now, and we ship all over Asia, to some of the Middle East, and do some domestic business. But the core focus of the company is in the export business for sure.
The episode that I did with Don Schilling has been one of the most popular ones, and you've listened to it. I'd love to hear your take on the hay export market. Maybe let's rewind pre-COVID, because that's when the world starts dramatically changing for a variety of reasons. So just the highlights.
Yeah, I think firstly, I think Don did a good job. That was a fun interview to listen to. I think for a lot of people in the industry, for like myself, we're fairly, we know the industry, we know the history of all the various exporters. And so he did a good job of speaking of, Anderson Wardrew. Don's been doing it a long time. Wesco's been around a long time. So that was a fun history to listen to for sure. But, the industry is old for sure. So, and grew from the 60s, and the early, the mid 2000s is when the volume really started to pick up. So at that point, in the mid 2000s, say 2007, 8, 9, 10, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan were pretty stable markets. The volume kind of wasn't really growing anymore from the U.S., but then you had the Middle East market began to really grow with the UAE entering, and then, U.S. alfalfa to China was approved in 2008. Then that market began to grow and then really accelerated in the 2016, 17 and on. Prior to COVID, the industry basically was facing just an increase in demand every year. 19 was greater than 18, 20. We had little blips. Obviously, people then in the agriculture world know 2008 was a crisis for sure. 2015, kind of, with the port slowdown that left more inventory here, and we saw price drops. But then into like I said, 18, 19, 20, the market was just growing. It's interesting to look back on that time, because I can think every year, felt like its own, not crisis, but unique market actions. But, we talk a lot in our office and make game plans, but the underlying thing was there was a growth in demand. So you were just trying to figure out how to position yourself to take advantage of that growth. In that time frame, China went from 0 tons in 2007 to, 1.6 million metric tons in 2020, in the calendar year of 22. You needed more than 40 new machines to service that, basically.
And you're talking presses.
Yeah, we always, just a general rule of thumb, Hunterwood press or we use them because they use them as an example because they're the premier machine, but can roughly do 50,000 tons a year if operated great. Some can't quite get that. Others can do more. But yeah, so if you have 1.6 million tons of demand, you needed more equipment. So the industry was adding more equipment. So that was a fairly stable growth period, and again has all its own unique market issues every year. But coming into COVID, that really tested, the big test there was testing people's logistic capability. We obviously had to deal with all the different COVID restrictions and individually on your own businesses and those things. But what it really tested was your individual logistic capability within your company. So that was a huge highlight for how robust is your trucking operation and your, vessel tracking and scheduling and booking capability. And so that was the story of, 2020, 21, and 22. And then, we had in 21, we had kind of most impactful drought condition I've ever dealt with. I mean, there's certainly droughts all over, but we really, in the spring of 21, I mean, you could have been raking up chaff that falls off trailer decks and selling it to people. We had people coming from all over looking for hay in the spring of 22.
We were out of hay.
Yeah, 21 was a drought conditions. I mean, all the, you guys, we buy lots of dryland timothy and, yields were terrible. Some didn't get cut. I mean, that was the most impacted area there. So lots more hay from the basin was going east, than normal. And so coming into 22, the market was very tight on supply and price was reflecting that. And then, that began to set up, along with the rate hike environment, began to set up what would be a disaster. So,
explain that disaster a little bit more.
Prices in 20, I'd have to think back quite a bit, but, prices increased, $70 or $80 from the summer. I'm speaking just alfalfa, let's say, for example, in summer of 21 to spring of 22, increased $70 or $80. So by new crop of 22, prices were strong. I mean, initial price was, I even remember paying, I think, $280 or $290 per ton for feeder hay, and we sold it right away. I mean, there was no hesitation from some of the domestic buyers that we sell to, and so that was a very, very strong price, a very strong movement. There were sales. We were getting sales on the domestic side and the export side based on this, very strong price. Again, driven by drought concern, and it really was there was a lack of supply versus what the demand was calling for. So that drove price higher, but then the one thing that we didn't account for ourselves within our own company, through every kind of crisis, we try to learn something in our company. Like in 2008, you got to look at, everything ran, oil, all commodities ran really high. We obviously had a huge financial crisis that drove significant issues. In 2015, kind of learning that if you have a real slowdown in shipments, which happened during the port slowdown, essentially, you have too much supply and price can drop. What we did not account for and did not think to account for in the summer of 22 was how the exchange rate environment, it sounds dumb because we speak about exchange rates all the time, but we didn't account for, the Federal Reserve increasing rates 10 times in 2 months, 3 months, the fastest rate hike cycle in history, right? We did not account for how drastically that would change the exchange rate environment. We didn't account for that. I always like to use the US dollar yen, which is, our largest trading partner is Japan. So US dollar yen went from, 110 to 115 yen per dollar. It ran all the way to 150 very quickly. They're in the mid 150s, and it dropped again. And now is sitting at the 156, 157 range, something like that again. That represents basically a 40% roughly, decrease in our customers' purchasing power. I like to use the example with people, we speak in dollars per ton in our industry all the time. I remember I had in June, I had a booking that I was shipping, so an order I was shipping to a customer. I had the last of what we call an old crop, so say 2021 alfalfa sales contract that we had that I think I was delivering to Japan for $450 per ton or $440 per metric ton delivered to a base port overseas, right? That was a 2021 contract we were finishing out. And then I sold the same customer some new crop hay, so 22, and I think it was delivering for like 600 or 610, right? So that just shows you, that's just the price increase. So the customer was paying, say, 450 roughly for a grade. Now they're going to pay 600 to 610. If you then add the exchange rate, change or differential onto that. You're going to take 600 and take another 40%. So you're going to be, roughly 900 or something like that. You're going to be 850, 900. So the difference for the importer in Japan was going from 450 to say roughly $900 per ton. If you're going to try to make things equal. And that there to anybody, that's going to start curbing demand, because it's going to force them to start looking for other alternatives, things like that. So the combination of, I think, prices reacting to a short supply situation in 21 leading into 22, and then this exchange rate change, it really put the cost of our U.S. forage to foreign customers was much, much, much higher. And that's what began to slow shipments down. People have too much inventory, and that, cascaded into, customers canceling contracts, reducing price if you want to ship, and a whole myriad of, every company dealt with things differently. But demand slowed down from the US. You and I have talked about this before, and many people have presented, but since that time, in the calendar year of 2022, the U.S. exported just over 4 million metric tons. I think it's close to 4.1 million metric tons of forage. And I believe in 2025, the year is going to finish just under 3 million, something like 2.8, 2.9 million. I haven't looked at the most recent statistic, but somewhere just under 3 million tons. So we've lost 1 million tons of demand.
Didn't we already cover that number at 50,000 tons per press?
We have. So if you have a million tons, I mean, now you have arguably 20 machines that don't ever need to turn on anymore. They don't need to. And that's if you're going to try to boil, the turmoil or the hardship in just the exporter part, in my company's position in the, forage supply chain, we have a significant overcapacity of processing capacity. That term, there's people who will argue that we've had excess processing capacity for the history of the, in the hay industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's true.
Looking to make a lighter footprint across your fields? Run Krone rakes. Available in working widths from 12.3 to 15.1 for single rakes and 18.8 all the way up to 62.4 feet in the twin and four rotor versions. Choose from multiple sizes and configurations to sweep across your field, gently lifting the crop into clean and boxy windrows. Ideal for the hungriest baler or chopper. Learn more at www.krone-northamerica.com.
Before we started recording, we were talking about the reactions to the Don Schilling podcast. Yeah. And one of them was a cattleman calling me saying, I'd never thought about hay press capacity the same way the beef industry thinks about slaughter processing capacity.
Sure.
That was a really interesting takeaway for a cattle producer to say, I guess the hay processing industry works the same as any other processing industry.
It does. And I mean, we can touch on it in a little bit, because I think it's an interesting thing. And you and I have talked before about this capacity issues, around all kinds of industries we're seeing now. But this decrease in demand has caused price decreases, because again, we had too much supply for the demand that the market was asking for. Now, the U.S. forage products are expensive. They're expensive on the world stage now. I mean, there's, just with the, with the exchange rates, if we were to try to sell at the same, to get our end user customer the same price that they were purchasing at prior to, the rate hikes and these exchange rate moves, we'd have to pay the grower almost nothing for hay.
And you truly mean $0?
Well, I mean probably close to zero. I mean, if you're having to overcome a 40% drop in their purchasing power just with their with their currency, you have to pay almost nothing for it. So obviously we can't do that. The market doesn't need us to do that. Clearly, we still are shipping. I mean, we're still exporting, like I said, near 3 million tons, which is a lot of business to do. That's still a lot of companies are operating. But as every businessman, knows, and all you farmers know, if demand's lower, our operations are expensive to operate. The machines are expensive. The parts, they're big, hydraulic machines, and all kinds of electrical components and packaging, and it's expensive. So when there is a lack of demand and all of that, processing capacity is still trying to chase the market, it drives margins down, and it's driving, people are trying to operate cheaper. They're cutting their processing costs they charge themselves probably below what your true cost is. The market's it's requiring everybody. So now, if you go from 22, obviously a huge price correction into 23, into 24. And since that time, every company has been trying to not only deal with the devastating financial losses from 22.
And you're talking about inventory write-downs.
Yes, I'm talking, inventory write-downs where you've got inventory you purchased that, in a lot of cases, we had hay that we purchased in 22 that was sold for $150 loss. You couldn't, there was not a large enough and that our company's not unique in that. There was not a large enough market as demand was decreasing to move all that inventory at the price you paid to the grower. So there was any combination of, price reductions and delaying payments and all kinds of things to growers trying to figure out how to survive and stay viable as a company. Leading to 23, 24, the same. And then leading into 25, I kind of, in our conversations in our company, with our management team every week in early 25, my concern was that this will truly, 25 would truly be the year where we would see companies exit. They would exit, whether through, there's been many different ways. There's companies that have sold a business unit, that they're a very large company that sold a business unit because it was no longer viable in their eyes or didn't want to carry it, to bankruptcies. There's obviously, we know there's a big one going on now. There was one early in the summer. Other facilities, if they have chosen to close. They've chosen to close down, if they had the ability to. So that was, we thought very strongly 2025 would be finally the year that's going to begin to shake out companies, because the market just couldn't support or can't support all of the capacity. It just doesn't seem like it can. So it's a very sad thing. I don't wish ill on any company, but that has played out. I think there's more to come in 26, unfortunately. I think there's more financial pressure because, if you just take the volume that was shipping in 2022, 2023, 24, 25, if you look at, and you just do a very conservative guesstimation on the losses that exporters took, you could get into the $500 or $600 million just from the U.S.
How many exporting firms are there, hay exporters in the U.S. in this market space?
That's a very good question. Just in the Northwest, there's more than 30. So there's not 100, but somewhere between 70 to 100, different companies. I haven't really counted in a long time, but.
And you're talking $500 or $600 million across, call it 75 companies.
I think you can very easily get to that. You can very easily get to that number. So if you say it's 600 million and say there's 60 active companies, that's a huge, and that's not, I think, a thing this is not a sob story. It's just the reality of what our part of the market is going to filter down. So that has obviously destroyed balance sheets of exporting companies, and then now, like I said, in 25, that took its toll. Were companies finally at the limit of could they continue operating? Banks are stepping in to take a look, especially with the agriculture market doesn't look fantastic looking forward into the near future. It doesn't. So banks began to step in and put real controls and forcing some companies, to have to declare bankruptcy or have to do something.
You're not a banker, right? But you understand some of the squeeze that might come from a bank. Could you just talk from the borrower's perspective? What do those squeezes look like?
I think there's very few companies that are operating, in the export world that don't borrow money. I obviously don't know everybody's personal situation, and every situation is slightly different. A lot of us operate on what's called a borrowing base. We operate on a borrowing base, which we're borrowing against receivables and inventory. Some larger, farm-based operations borrow in a different manner. But essentially, as we've all taken huge, balance sheet hits. In many cases, equity's gone. You're looking at a poor equity position. Cash is very limited. And so, yeah, what banks will begin to do is, if you begin to struggle meeting your, borrowing base obligations, they'll begin to clamp down. The first thing they'll do is they'll begin to limit what you can borrow, right? They'll start to limit, they'll start dropping, your maximum amount of money you can borrow. So that'll happen for sure. And then if it gets bad enough to where you're not performing on your loan, you're not performing on your loan terms, whether you're not making payments, you're outside of some of your compliance, within your loan agreements, then, the bank, they'll either start claiming receivables and paying down the line automatically, which hurts you as far as operating goes. There's any number of restrictions. And then, worst case, as far as operating as a company, if you're not able to show kind of a good path forward, which means, we've had pretty devastating years. If you're not able to show that you have some level of profitability, or how can you get to profitability in the next 6 months or 12 months, if you can't show that with the current environment, a bank may just, they'll start seizing receivables, basically. As money is coming in from customers, they're not going to let you pay out to expenses. They're going to pay down the line. That essentially will stop operation. And in some cases, some companies, the only way to stop that, I've never had to do it, thankfully, but is to declare bankruptcy. You have to. That's a way to stop your secured creditor from coming after, receivables, and then now you're forced with trying to come up with a plan. But I mean, that's the worst case. I mean, before you get to that, there's restrictions. Obviously restrictions on capital expenditures. There's restrictions on some operations and things like that. But when you're borrowing, the bank truly is in control. I mean, they're in control of, if things don't look good, they can step in and do many things.
One of the things you said in there leads us on to the next part of the conversation, creating a plan that looks like you're going to get back to profitability. What does that look like? Where are we at? Where's the marketplace at? Maybe where are you guys at?
Let's just say 2026 looking forward. The market looks a little more stable than what I think it has for a little while. The plan for each individual company is, obviously different. For ourselves, you are actually, let's be very honest, we are seeing companies exit, whether that's a unique thing in its own. I'll say something real quick about that. In 25, I really thought, myself personally, that the companies that you would see exiting, whether by choice or by force, would be smaller ones, or ones, say, like mine or others. And these larger, Don touched on it. There are a handful of companies that are very well capitalized from money outside the U.S. Right? There's a couple Japanese-backed companies that have essentially unlimited resources. I mean,
for all intents and purposes,
they have to operate within their company guidelines, but they have access to capital that we don't. Aldara is a very big one. They're backed by Sovereign Wealth Fund of the UAE. Don mentioned that. That's a well-known one. My feeling is that those types of companies would be the ones that would say, okay, there's real weakness in the U.S. There's real weakness in the U.S. export market. This is a time where we can capture and gain market share because we have the capital to survive a few more years and push these other companies out that don't. That's what I thought would happen. I think it's fair to say the opposite has happened, where these large, not every company, but there's several Chinese owned or Chinese backed ones that have closed this last year. There's, Aldara to some extent is leaving the U.S. I mean, they've closed one facility. They may be closing the Ellensburg one. We're not real sure. There's all kinds of rumors of what's actually happening. A lot of the large, what you would think is very highly capitalized companies are exiting the hay business, which for companies like my own and for others like ours, that's positive. That's a positive thing because that capacity is going away. As that processing capacity is going away at the moment, it's creating a perception of more demand for the remaining companies. So that is a positive thing for the remaining companies.
I still like talking about the number of presses, not the exporting companies. We can separate those two ideas and not talk about people. We can talk about machines. That's way easier. Are those machines going to be exported? Are we going to end up exporting our hay trading industry to further Latvia or Romania or Estonia or Turkey or South Africa. I mean, any number of developing hay producing regions, and shoot ourselves in the foot for the long run. I mean, I'm thinking back for maybe some wheat farmers who's, when you say Jimmy Carter, they still spit on the ground. Like, you see the parallels that I'm trying to draw here are the geopolitical things that are so far removed from our ag sphere, like the Soviet Union taking over our wheat industry. Is that going to come to fruition?
There's no question that there's growing hay and forage production around the world. There's regions that we know of that are continuing to grow. I mean, there's all the famous ones that anybody in the industry knows, where they're obviously in Spain, Australia, those countries. But, Italy, Romania, Bulgaria, South Africa, and South America, there's all these regions that are growing. Now, forage demand is still growing. That's one thing I was going to mention earlier, is that the number of cattle is, I mean, in China, the number of cattle has decreased for sure, but the growing demand for forage is still growing. We do have significant competitor regions that are growing as well. Whether machines from the US will make it to other places, I don't know that. I mean, there's only a handful of press manufacturers. The largest one, went bankrupt a couple of years ago and isn't producing anymore. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of these machines make their way somewhere else, but I don't know of any at the moment. I mean, maybe the big Middle Eastern company, when they're leaving, maybe they're going to ship their machines overseas. Could be. But, the machine itself can be built. There's European press manufacturers, and they have a whole different system there, right? I mean, a lot of that, they're big dryers and a different bale size and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure if we'll see this equipment leave somewhere, but it could. It could for sure. But the production is going to continue growing, I think, in other places, regardless of whether our machines leave the US. I like to use the example. I have a Japanese customer who actually has an office in the Middle East, and they're buying alfalfa from Pakistan. And they're buying alfalfa from Pakistan for, like, I think $200 per metric ton delivered to the Middle East. I mean, that basically is our entire processing and logistic cost to that market. It's actually our cost is more. So that's just, we can't touch that product ever, right? That's a non-starter to compete with. So those areas are going to keep growing. The US is still unique. Don touched on it briefly, is still uniquely positioned because we are very stable, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes in our own country or our wonderful state. It doesn't feel very stable, but we don't have huge issues in the country that keep us from shipping. We're roughly 2 to 3 weeks away from our main markets on a vessel, right? Our transit time is so short compared to these other areas. I mean, from Europe to Asia is 60 to 90 days, right? I mean, it's a long transit time. Australia to Japan and those is 30 to 60 days, just depends on the routing. So we're still uniquely positioned, but without question, we have real supply competitors. And I know it's a long way to answer the question. I don't see any machines leaving, but it wouldn't surprise me try to sell their machines overseas or something like that. But
that was not really optimistic, but
no, but I think I do think there is some, again, in our every part of the market, we'll back up a little bit too. Every part of the market in a big correction takes its turn. The first in 22 and 23, all of the importing companies overseas, our customers, if you're an exporter, you're selling to importers, basically. They all took their losses because the dairymen they sell to or wholesalers they sell to began to reduce what they bought. Those losses get pushed on us. Eventually lower prices go to the farm and the market takes its turn. I mean, in a lot of cases, the importing companies that we sell to, they're in a healthier position now. They've gone through some of their consolidation. They should be trading product at a profitable level. So they're in a bit healthier position at the moment as they've gone through a lot of their changes. The exporter part of the market is going through our big changes now. Companies are leaving, exiting. Other companies are retooling a bit to take advantage of opportunity of other exporting companies leaving. And so looking forward, as I think unless there's some other unless the current administration makes more tariff changes, more trade policy changes, or our exchange rate environment changes significantly, it feels to me like the market is a little bit more stable. and where you can, and we feel it with customers beginning to want to purchase on a little bit longer term basis. They feel more comfortable with the market situation. Japan, Korea, Taiwan are pretty, like I've said before, are pretty stable markets. The volume is slowly decreasing, as no secret, population is decreasing, but they're pretty stable. China, I think, my personal opinion, I think we've seen the lowest volume shipping there already, and I think it could continue. I think it could start growing again. Their dairy market over the past 5 years, the number of cattle have been decreasing as their milk price was terrible. Like most things the Chinese government does, they way overdid. They were producing far too much milk. And I believe the number is, I think they had a declining milk price to the dairymen for over 40 months straight. And I believe it'd have to be August or September, something like that. That flattened, and you've slowly seen the milk price start to come up. That's a positive sign. If the milk price, I think it's a customer share. I think milk price in China at the moment is like 3.1 RMB per kg. They use renminbi or right. So I believe a lot of customers tell us if that milk price gets to 3.15 or 3.2, they'll significantly increase the amount of alfalfa they're feeding in their ration. So we're getting close, I think, to where the largest alfalfa market in the world might start increasing alfalfa consumption again. That's a positive thing. So kind of looking forward, if you've managed to kind of as an exporter, keep a customer base through this time, you've figured out how to work with your bank to keep operating, and you've managed to stay relevant more or less in your customers' eyes and growers' eyes, I do think there is opportunity in 26 going forward. A lot of my competitors would disagree. A lot of our competitors would think that the market's completely different and it's not viable. And we think there's a positive future. You have to really control your costs. You have to really understand your equipment and produce. But there still is, like I said, 3+ million tons of demand. That's going to be serviced by some companies. Some are going to figure it out and others are not going to. So I do think there is optimism just from our part of the market. Now, prices to the farm are still not great. I don't think they're profitable in most cases. Maybe Timothy, but alfalfa still I don't think is profitable. That has so much more to do with all of the other feed ingredients. We don't control we don't control the true market price. We don't control it. We're a participant for sure, but we can only pay what we can pay based on our cost and all this. And if price gets too high and corn, soybean meal, all the other feed ingredients are still relatively low, we can't ship. Right? It's the same thing overseas. The ration formulation overseas is the same thing that we do in the US here. They just have some other different local ingredients that they use as different, feed sources than we do. But it's the same exact thing. If our pricing's too high, they look to adjust the ration. I think to see for the farm perspective, we've got to see a change in the big agriculture products, but that's hard. Export demand for all agricultural goods is down. It's been down, a small percentage each year for the past 4 or 5 years because of the exchange rate environment. And because of that, the U.S. is just producing too much. I think if you try to boil things down, we're producing too much product for the demand that we have now.
And you mean across the board? We're talking about corn, soybeans, wheat, the works.
Yes, I don't think there's a commodity that's not touched by this because, domestic consumption, I don't study that a lot, but I don't think domestic consumption is down all that much on any agricultural good. I don't think so because we're all still consuming and eating. Yes, the price of everything is higher, so there might be some incremental beef price is high, so maybe people are eating more chicken or pork or something like that. But still, I think roughly and relatively speaking, we're consuming about the same. But almost every agricultural good that we produce in the U.S., or corn, soybeans, wheat, those big ones, potatoes, onions, all the tree fruit products, all of that has an export component. All of it does. We export some of all of those products, and since we've seen a 2, 3, 4, 5% decrease in demand year over year for a couple years now. You even have some of the big potato processors, in our area that were increasing capacity 5 years ago. They're decreasing. They're decreasing acres. They're decreasing price because we export a lot of potatoes. I mean, we have a very good friend of ours that was even saying that I think it's McCain, maybe it's McCain, is for the first time in a long time building a new potato plant in Germany, which they haven't done. They haven't done that for years. But kind of looking at, well, the U.S. is expensive relative on the world market. We're an expensive producer, number one, because of all of our costs. Number two, the exchange rate environment. So they're looking to increase supply in other places. I don't think we haven't seen that for a long time. The U.S. has just been increasing production and increasing supply to meet the world demand for decades. And now we're faced with a situation where we actually have a decrease in demand. The market is trying to figure that out. And that's happening everywhere with tree fruit. Potatoes and onions are such a huge crop in the Columbia Basin. It's happening there. And that's not a quick fix. I mean, growers, you'd have to all farm less, which I don't think we know how to do that. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to do that financially.
Oh, no.
We don't know how to do that.
We're about to figure it out, I think.
I unfortunately, unless there's some large trade policy change, which, I mean, all the trade agreements are being worked on, that's all great, but those take time. I mean,
And they're not strictly agriculturally focused. We're not doing trade deals for agriculture. That doesn't exist.
I don't believe so, no. I don't think so. Even if it's said, I don't believe so.
And then to rest your entire fate on whether Trump tweets about a foreign country today or not, that's risky.
It is. And I mean, 2025 on top of, all of the, like I mentioned before, that, we've got the financial weakness in just our part of the industry really took its toll in 25 and was going to cause significant change in companies, right? That happened. But yeah, for like our own company, the first quarter of 25 was good. It was good volume and a positive quarter. The second quarter was terrible. I mean, after Liberation Day in April, which we don't call it Liberation Day in our office, but Chaos Day or whatever you want to call it. It's because in that time, we were when the tariff escalation with China happened, we were forced to reroute. All of us were forced to reroute cargo, and then a couple weeks later, everything was paused and undone. So we had to reroute again. That caused, I think some people know, but it's not commonly known that a lot of product was on its way to China when the Trump administration was aggressively, using tariffs against the Chinese guy to try to force, whatever their agenda was. When the retaliatory tariff from China hit 125%, basically our customers in China said, no, we cannot import this cargo, right? We can't pay you the invoice value and then have to pay the Chinese government or whatever another 125%. So basically that cargo, if it actually made it to China, was worth $0. Okay. And actually less, because we'd have real costs. As shippers, we would have real costs as it hit the port and our customer would not clear it or something like that. So a lot of cargo actually got routed to Japan, got rerouted to Korea. And that flooded those markets because those countries were already shipping their normal needs. Right. So then for, the summer months or the third quarter, one of the big problems is there was an oversupply of product in other markets. That, 3-week basically negotiation between the administration and China, that caused a lot of havoc. It wreaked, even though all those tariffs are essentially, not all of them, but most of it was paused. We had to make changes as shippers, and we ended up being able to, our own company, routing everything to China, fortunately. But other companies that shipped more there at that time, or they routed to the other markets, and that created a surplus, and that pushed price lower. That pushed price lower in the summer months, which again, if companies purchased inventory in May and June, and they did not sell it right away, or they weren't staying current with the market, you had another year of you purchased inventory that inventory was worth less a couple months later.
The timing in that was particularly devastating.
Yes, because it was the beginning of the purchasing season.
Yeah, it was the new marketing year.
Yep. And so you're trying to make, if you're actively participating, because, like ourselves, we have to run because we have real costs, right? We have payments and
You have machines that have to run. Yep.
We have to process. So you're actively participating. That was just another chaotic time. So the second and third quarter were really rough for sure. Uncertainty with buyers because they don't know what they're going to wake up to. Do we all of a sudden have, increased tariffs on Japanese products? And so the Japanese government's going to retaliate. They just don't know, right? So, and then the fourth quarter was, for ourselves, was better. It was a little bit better. And that, a huge part of that is not as much trade talk, not as much tariff talk and all that stuff as far as new threats. And then not fun for other people, but companies going away, that demand comes to the remaining ones. So things were a little bit better fourth quarter. And then we'll see 26. It looks like it'll start off okay, but we never know what the trade environment looks like. So all that being said, on the agriculture as a whole, it looks like it's going to be a little bit tough as we're dealing with, we're producing too much in the US unless we can find a way to, create more demand. But, one of the only ways I believe that can happen is our dollar for the exporter, we need a weak dollar. That's, it's always a funny thing to say, but the agriculture world wants a weak dollar, right? Because we export so much.
Need your hay dried down faster without leaf loss? Krone Tedders offer the best solution by getting your crop off the field faster. Available in both trailed models and drawbar hitches with the widest range of sizes. All Krone Tedders feature flotation tires and specially engineered tines to lift the crop and distribute it evenly across the swath. Less ash and greener hay? That's the Krone way. Learn more at krone-northamerica.com.
I'm going to make a case here that if you think you want a strong dollar, that means you can buy cheap junk from China cheaper and you're not making anything to sell to the rest of the world. A strong dollar is terrible for the U.S.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing sometimes when, we kind of listen to the administration a lot, the current administration, we have such a huge export industry. We don't export as much as we import. Obviously, we import far more products, and far more dollars worth of goods. But we have such a big export focus, and it's interesting to listen to the administration. They don't mention that much. We have
right.
We have we have essentially since President Reagan took tariffs to near zero, and companies go across the world and do your business essentially, right? That's to kind of simply summarize. And so we've had, 40 plus years of trade development with other countries, both, I'm not going to make the argument that was an overly positive thing for the country. That's above that's way above my pay
We could
grade.
argue that we exported some of our a large portion of our manufacturing capacity.
Absolutely. You can argue that for sure. And whether or not we would have been better off not doing that, I don't know. But in that time frame, we built huge export industries. We built, from farms to production facilities to trucking companies to, transloading facilities to all of this infrastructure that is involved in international trade, both on the importing side and the exporting side. It represents, tens of millions of jobs. That's no exaggeration. The way that that is as the changes over the past, 12 months have come through trade policy and tariffs, you've seen devastation in the trucking industry. You've seen, trucking companies are going away because the volume of goods moving internationally is not happening. The volume of imported products are way down from tires to parts because not as much product is moving as it was several years ago. It's not the case. And that is directly, related to trade policy. Now, in the longer term, if there is a long-term strategy and you do see manufacturing of some products, come back to the US, maybe all of this turmoil is worth it and benefits the country. It's hard to look beyond your own business sometimes, for sure.
Right.
It's certainly hard to look beyond that.
Especially when you're talking about the kind of disruption that you experienced.
Oh, for sure. And so that's what makes trying to understand what the actual trade policy is challenging, for sure. Yeah, maybe we are going to see products come back, but I think a lot of people that champion all the manufacturing coming back, and would maybe be a good thing, but a lot of the people who champion that, I don't think or maybe they understand, maybe they don't, that if we bring products that are manufactured overseas currently that we import, if we bring those and make them here, they'll be more expensive. I mean, you can kind of easily go to look on Grok or ChatGPT and ask. There's been plenty of studies. If Apple made all their iPhones in the U.S., your $1,000 iPhone would be $3,000 or $4,000. I mean, labor's higher, taxes are higher, all of those things are higher in the U.S. So, that has a cost too. If we're going to produce everything, it's kind of what the administration talks about. Hey, if you don't want a tariff, make it all here. But the problem is that we would have a lot more expensive goods. The shipbuilding one is a great example. We have this. We as our industry, we're going to face not ourselves personally, but the shipping industry was going to face basically China built vessel tax, essentially, that was going to be paid. I believe it was going to take effect October 13th or 14th. Essentially, for people who don't know, the federal government decided that we wanted to begin to build, big ocean vessels, the container ships in the U.S. again, right? Which we don't really do now. We only have one U.S. flag shipping company in the U.S. now. It's called Matson. Basically, Matson carries goods within the U.S. They carry goods from the mainland to Alaska and then to some of the U.S. territories. And then Matson also carries military stuff as well. There are other carriers who carry U.S. military product, but Matson essentially is the only U.S. flagged carrier. There used to be more, but to be a U.S. flagged ocean carrier, you have to employ U.S. sailors. You have to have U.S. built vessels and all this stuff, which has just made it cost prohibitive. The things we make, we can't. The other countries that employ people cheaper, they build vessels cheaper, and so the large ocean carriers are all essentially foreign owned. Well, the Trump administration wanted to increase, shipbuilding again in the U.S., which sounds great. It'd be great if we build vessels. There's all kinds of positive reasons to. You have a more robust, industrial complex, so you can build in wartime. You have all those, arguments. So one of the ways they wanted to do that was they were going to apply a $1.25 basically $1 million fee per port call on any vessel that came to the U.S. that was built in China, which I think the statistic is 40%, I think, of the
global shipping fleet. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's 40%. The big shipbuilders are China, South Korea, and then some European countries. But, that was going to cause a big problem for a lot of the ocean carriers. So there's 3 Chinese-owned ocean carriers, which pretty much have, only Chinese-built vessels. So that was a problem. But what ended up happening is over the summer months, or the shipping lines, they basically rerouted all of those vessels to other areas in the world. So there's many different trade lanes for people who don't quite understand. There's the U.S. Asia trade lane. There's the U.S. or say U.S. West Coast to Asia, U.S. West Coast to Middle East, and there's the East Coast to Europe. The largest trade route in the world, which just means the largest capacity by trade lane, is from Asia to Europe. That's the largest, as far as vessel capacity. So they basically took the Chinese built vessels, if they could, and they routed them to other areas in the world. Now, again, that causes a disruption. So if people think, if you're
and a month's long, that's not an easily fixable thing, because if you put a ship on a trade route from China to Amsterdam, right, it's going to be a while.
It takes a long time. I use the example with people that, I'm not trying to talk down or, explain too simply, but if you have a truck that's going to go from Seattle to Portland to Tri-Cities to Spokane back to Seattle, say it takes a week, right? A week to get from Seattle to Portland, right? So a week on each stop. If all of a sudden now, me as a planner, my main job is overseeing our logistics in our company and managing our team. as we plan 6 to 8 weeks out, I might be loading product on a vessel. Just say it's in Seattle right now. I'm loading it right now. I already know when that vessel is going to come back. It's going to be back in, say, 6 weeks. I can see on the schedule it's going to be back. I'm making bookings and reservations on that vessel. Well, now all of a sudden, again, using our example from Seattle to Portland, let's say that vessel, when it got back, it's one of these Chinese built ones, right? And it's going to be back in a month to Seattle. They say, well, I don't want to pay $1.25 million per stop in the US. What they did was the vessel went from Seattle to Portland to Tri-Cities to Spokane, and then it went to Boise. And then it went to Missoula, Montana, and then it eventually made it to New York. Well, that vessel never came back. And they would then try to route another vessel into that service. Well, there was just big disruption. There was big disruption in the fall.
That was a Korean-made vessel.
Yes, that's a Korean-made vessel or a Danish-made vessel.
Not an American-made vessel because they don't exist.
That's exactly right. So all of the ocean carriers essentially routed. There's some ocean carriers that were able to route all of their Chinese-built vessels out of the U.S. And then there's a couple that just had too high of a percentage. I think OOCL was one, and maybe Costco was the other one. That they did. They paid on October 14th, when that fee was implemented, they paid huge sums of money. Right after the implementation date, the administration extended that rule 12 months or 18 months. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But again, for some reason, that was used as a negotiation tool. And the intent was to try to get, well, if you don't want to pay that tax, then use a U.S. built vessel or something, right? Well, number one, we don't make big enough ones yet. Right. We don't do that. They don't exist yet. We don't, The Matson size vessels that they use are 2,000 to 4,000 TEU or 20-foot container vessels, right? I mean, that's what they are. Most of the ones that call the West Coast are anywhere from 8,000 to 15,000. There could be some larger ones in Long Beach, maybe as much as 20,000, but they're just much bigger. They're much bigger vessels. It's not economical for them to use, for the large ocean carriers to use a small vessel. It's just not. The reason I say that whole story is it's another example of whatever the real reason was for that rule or that fee to incentivize U.S. shipbuilding. Number one, the ocean carriers responded in a different way. They moved those vessels out of the U.S. service as much as they could. And so that was very disruptive as far as just shipping and logistic wise. It was disruptive. And then secondly, the rule just went away. They suspended the rule for 12 to 18 months. So that makes you begin to kind of question or understand what is the real reason for all of these trade policies. If the true policy is to get manufacturing back here, you would need to leave those things in place to really force the market to begin to change. You would need to leave it in place. But
now you're starting to sound a little cynical, Scott.
I'll have to blame one of my brothers for that. I'm teasing. It's a little bit difficult, not to. You and I were texting the other day.
Yeah.
It's a little bit challenging to not be a bit cynical because, I think a good part of this conversation would be, to go towards, you and I talked here a couple months ago just about, what kinds of things could the U.S. forage market look to the government or ask for? I mean, that really, I don't want free money. I mean, that'd be great. That'd be great. Just give us all. But that has a cost, right? In all of this disruption, which 12 months is not that much time.
Oh, right.
In a business cycle, 12 months is not very long. So all of that disruption has been very challenging to try to figure out what to do and how to position your company going forward. Because as the companies who are surviving, as we're healing and beginning to make plans and, you're trying to rebuild balance sheet, rebuild your financial health. As we're doing that, it's very challenging to predict what's coming from the administration level or the currency environment level, because those have significant impacts. So two things: the trade policy with the administration, we never know what's going to happen. The second thing, monetary policy wise, we don't really, obviously Trump wants lower interest rates. He's wanting that. He wants to force them down. Even though the US has lowered rates several times this year, the exchange rate markets are not responding. It's not moving. And
actually, it's going the wrong way. We've lowered rates in the dollar yen. We've gone from 140 to 156, 57 again.
And interest rates aren't dropping that much, which that's, again, concerning if we want to see demand grow, right? If we want to see demand grow, we can't really lower prices in the US, right? We can't produce cheaper than we're already producing right now. Not really. I mean, I guess if John...
You have to cut corners to produce cheaper right now.
Yes, or, I guess anybody who's renting ground, the landlord needs to not charge you anything. Or, John Deere needs to take their $1 million combine to 500,000, which I just don't know. Maybe those, but I don't think those are realistic. There's nothing short term that's going to help the U.S. produce product cheaper, I don't think. I'm not sure if there is. Now, borrowing costs, if interest rates come down, borrowing costs helps a lot. Our interest costs would be lower. If the exchange rate environment doesn't move, which I'm real curious this next year to see if the administration successfully sees lower rates, will the interest rate actually drop? Because I think another concern that the market out there has is that the U.S., debt situation doesn't look great. And so even though the Federal Reserve is going to lower the overnight lending rate, will the market actually drop, or does the market look at the U.S. as a little more risky? And so they're going to demand a higher interest rate, or the Treasury, when they're issuing.
Known for greater throughput even in the heaviest crops, Krone Big Backs are the world's fastest large balers. With proven bale quality and increased density over other brands, Krone Big Back balers are the right choice for optimized productivity. Talk with your local dealer to learn more about Krone machines, built for generations.
What I just heard you say is even though the Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates, there's still a perception of risk in the market that's keeping the borrowing costs separate from the Federal Reserve rate.
I think so, because it would, a little bit intuitively, you would think, okay, well, raising interest rates caused, a higher interest rate in the U.S. brought more money to the U.S., right? People, you see 3, 4, 5% rates. Now the world says, well, it's been zero for almost 15 years. We can come and we got to purchase dollars to do that, drives the dollar higher, and now we can take advantage of a higher rate in the U.S. So you would think that, well, if the Federal Reserve just lowers interest rates, we'd see the reverse, or we'd see the opposite.
It's not inherently the situation, because there's other risks, not just the Federal Reserve.
In the back of our mind, that's the concern, is that maybe we won't see the exchange rate. Maybe we won't see 130 yen per dollar. Maybe not. We might not see that.
One of the things I'm concerned about, and you talked about it, but not in the way that I was thinking about it, you're talking about import volumes being down tremendously, and I understand container availability for your export product is extremely tough right now. Does that mean U.S. companies are buying less junk from China? Probably, right? Fewer TVs, fewer computers, fewer whatevers, right? You mentioned tires. There's less coming into the U.S., whatever it is. Furniture. I know for a fact there's less furniture coming into the U.S.
Furniture is a big one. Yep.
What does that tell us? You confirmed it. Just talking about that container movement throughout the world. The containers come to the U.S. loaded with consumer goods and leave filled with hay. Hay has long been Washington State's largest containerized export by volume, not dollar value. Mm-hmm. That's airplane parts, Boeing, right?
Yeah, not just the state. I mean, it's the whole West Coast. It's the largest containerized product off the West Coast. Yep.
Yes,
for
correct.
Sure.
So hay plays a meaningful role in global trade flows because it's the backhaul. Anybody in trucking and logistics knows that the way to make logistics work is to get the right backhauls.
Correct.
All right, we're on the same page here. We don't have the products coming in. That makes getting products out harder. That's the way that you framed it. When I hear fewer containers coming in, I'm looking at domestic retailers selling less product. That's what that has to translate to. Why are domestic retailers selling less product? And I don't, we're still too early in this game to really understand what's going on. But it is something to watch. That seems to imply that there's weakness in consumer demand.
Number one, I'll say this isn't unpopular thing for the administration here, but for people who don't know, A tariff is paid by, it's very simple. A tariff is paid by the importing company, right? A tariff is not paid by a foreign country. It's not paid by the foreign exporter. That's not how it works. A tariff is collected when cargo comes to the US. Whoever the importer is, the product is the importer imports, and part of the customs clearance process is to pay whatever tariff is assigned. It gets paid to Customs and Border Patrol and then goes to Treasury. So the actual cost goes to the importing company. Now there's some foreign companies that have their own import company in the US and blah blah, but the vast majority of the tariff money that is being collected is coming from US companies. It's coming from the US, importer.
So then are the US owned companies bringing in less foreign product because it's more expensive, which leaves the question about the end user, the domestic consumer, the American consumer. Is this an indicator of recession? It starts to raise some of those questions. Or does the lack of goods trading in the economy lead to the recession just because they're more expensive?
I think both things are probably true. I do think that you are getting hints. The large U.S. retailers, Walmart and Amazon and all of those large ones. They in the second and third quarter in their earnings calls, you can go read transcripts or listen to them. They were, let's just say generally speaking, because I listened to many of them. Generally speaking, they were trying to internalize the tariff cost. The increased cost that they were trying to internalize that cost on their own balance sheet and trying to see and gauge, can their customer handle an increased cost? That's what I believe the strategy for most large retailers were. And we even see, a lot of our parts and packaging and stuff comes from overseas. We didn't see an immediate pass on of that increase. Now we do. We get parts bills now that have a tariff line item. The real large retailers were saying that they try to internalize. Now, when they announced Q3 earnings towards the end, Walmart was the first one that said, Walmart was the only company that I read or listened to that did not see a revenue drop in Q3. Most of the other large retailers saw a revenue drop as they were increasing, as the cost of their goods were increasing to the consumer, because you go to the store and you only have whatever $200. You're only going to buy $200 worth of stuff. And right now that's getting you less. Walmart was the only one that did not see a drop, but they specifically cited that they had seen people that normally shop at Whole Foods that shop at,
consumers are trading down was the explanation.
They're coming down. So they said that they saw a new round of customer that was now shopping at Walmart that used to shop at a more expensive option. So I think that's one thing. And the retailers are indicating that, hey, this policy is having an impact. We're seeing, number one, the cost is increased. They're not able to pass that cost on in full. And I agree with you completely. We talk about trucking companies a lot because we deal with them. They're moving less goods, which means that company has less money. Those drivers, there's drivers that are laid off. There's trucks that are parked. That absolutely will have an impact on the economy. That's less spending.
I hate to bury something for the U.S. domestic hay producer that has nothing to do with exports this far into the episode. But these are the things driving those low freight rates that are favoring hay moving way more freely across the country.
Companies are forced to drop their rates because there's less work, and so there's a rate drop on trucking, which is not. Yeah, if you're paying for it, that's great, but it's not healthy for that business to have to drop rates that much. That's not a good thing. So, but you're right. Getting a little bit away from the hay business itself is important sometimes because all of our agricultural products have such a big export component. It's important to pay attention to what the level of imports are. I mean, like the Northwest Seaport Alliance, who's oversees the Port of Seattle, Tacoma. They're forecasting, I believe, imports in the first quarter to still be down 15 to 20%, which means very, very simply, that means that there's 15 to 20% less containers coming to the U.S. That means that the ocean carriers are going to bring 15 to 20% less capacity to the U.S. They don't sail their vessel half full. They don't do that very often. They'll start parking capacity. Just like you as, trucking company, you're not going to haul half of a load. You're not, on a set of doubles, you're not going to haul half of a load to Montana from Moses Lake. You're not going to do that. It just doesn't make sense. So you, instead of going once a week, you're going to go every other week. That's what you're going to do. And so that's what the ocean carriers are beginning to do, is they're beginning to park capacity, which means, again, that there's a constraint on the schedule that we can provide to our customers. So we can still figure it out. It just becomes more challenging again as the amount of volume coming to the U.S. decreases, because we're just buying less stuff. We're importing less because the retailers cannot sell it, begins to hinder other parts of the industry for sure.
The other thing I worry about with recession is a large portion of our domestic demand for hay is actually consumer oriented. And the obvious example is equine. So if you're trying to ship hay all over the country chasing equine markets, and all of a sudden we're in a recession, horses are discretionary spending. Every single day of the week, a recession has a meaningful impact on equine demand. Period. End of story. And then as we work back through the things that we eat, obviously I might chew on a little hay to check out how sweet it is, but we don't eat hay. We eat the cows, right? How do consumers respond in terms of protein demand during a recession? Do they go out and buy fancy cheeses, or do they buy cheap cheeses? Do they go out and buy chicken, or do they buy beef? Do chickens eat hay? No.
Not that I know of.
No.
Not much.
So we can see, while I'm not calling a recession by any stretch, we can see that we should think about it. It has to be a part of the thought process, because all of a sudden our focus is turning very domestic in our hay market because of the losses in the export industry. It becomes a bigger risk, especially for West Coast producers.
Yeah, I mean, you probably would know more. You do more. You sell a lot of retail stuff up in your area. But after 2008 into 9 and 10, I think there was people were turning horses loose. I mean, there were horses running. People from the west side of Washington would come over and just turn horses loose in the field here.
Oh, it was. I'll save my horse rescue stories.
Yeah, sad.
We don't have to think back that far. 2008 is the example of that.
Yeah, it's not very far. So I mean, hopefully, the U.S. is a large economy. Hopefully, a lot of that's not on the horizon. But fewer goods trading, or fewer goods coming to the U.S. means fewer trucks needed, which there's not just excess work to go do, right? Means there's fewer loads to haul. There's fewer loads to warehouse. I mean, all of that. You don't need to warehouse as many goods, and all of those things for sure. So, and until, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, I think until we see, our rate policy or something change, I think we're in this kind of environment for a little while. I think we are, because hopefully a big trade agreement is coming or something like. I mean, in the hay world, the target market would be India. Hopefully there's.
How's that trade relationship going right now? It's not good.
Again,
I already know the answer to that question. It's not good.
There's many cynical comments they could make, but we'll save those. So
yeah.
But yeah, I think we're in for 26. Like I said, we're in for. Everyone has to buckle up, because I don't know what's coming from a demand. A demand increase. Side. I would be interested to talk a little bit about, John, if you want to, about. You sent a text here the other day that had the framework for what this
is a health of the industry discussion. Yes.
Yeah, this $12 billion in farm payments or whatever it is. I mean, that I'd be curious to hear what your take is on that.
Krone tedders and rakes are specially designed for one goal: making the cleanest green hay without causing damage to your field or crop. It's all in the tine design, which gently lift and move your crop while flotation tires lessen compaction. Krone offers the largest selection of models and range of sizes in the world, so you get what works best for your operation. Find your local Krone dealer at krone-northamerica.com.
My take is a little rough. I hope unpopular. because that'll stir things up a little bit. Now, we have representation at NAFA, the National Alfalfa Forage Alliance, and they go to DC and they lobby for the forage industry. They've been moderately successful, and especially procuring research dollars. Super helpful to the industry. They'll tell you that alfalfa is the fourth largest crop in the U.S. Corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. I'm going to be a little hard on NAFA here and say what they miss is the grass hay, the other hay, the way the USDA reports it, the other hay in the U.S. that makes hay the third largest crop in the U.S., not just alfalfa. Right. There's very few producers that just grow alfalfa. They exist, but it's very few. As we think about the whole hay industry, we face increased pressures from corn, soybean, and wheat growers, and cotton and sorghum and all the other ones that are getting these payments because it creates a differential. The corn farmer next door gets a payment that you don't. He's better capitalized. He can do things that you then can't. So I hear a lot of hay farmers tell me, I don't want anything to do with the government. And like as hard as you've been on Trump and Trump's trade policies, we're both fairly conservative, especially fiscally conservative, certainly.
Sure.
And in a blue state like Washington, we look like the right-wing wackos.
More and more every day.
Yes. We just have a disadvantage in the national marketplace because of these subsidies. And what sounds like a one-time payment is not a one-time payment because ARC and PLC exist every single year, and hay farmers don't get that either. And I know that there's a lot of folks that love the idea of hay being a pure and free market. I'm just going to say it's bullshit because it's not, because we're at a disadvantage. And we can talk about other subsidies that are distorting the hay market. We can think about the ethanol industry and the distillers' grains that come out of that industry that go right into dairy rations that absolutely displace alfalfa in dairy rations. It is not hard to come to the conclusion that ethanol mandates and ARC and PLC and this latest round of $12 billion in payments, it's not doing the hay industry any favors. It's actually making it harder for us every single day.
Yeah, it's what's it called? FBA, Farmer Bridge Assistance.
FBA. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's it. It's creating a market distortion. And I think the problem the hay industry has is that we're not willing to go and fight against it because it means fighting against all of the rest of agriculture who are getting subsidies and payments. It just doesn't, that's a non-winnable battle.
Sure.
It makes us the redheaded stepchildren. So we get to step back as the hay industry and say, do whatever you want to us. We're going to take it because we hate the government and we're not willing to do anything to fix it.
It's interesting. That's it.
It's the worst place to be.
I know that's a unique perspective too, because it's, farmers are farmers. So it's a unique, I mean, we have a problem in the hay business. We don't have, we don't have a large commission. We don't have these, $1 million, multi-million-dollar lobbying budgets. And
there's more cattle lobbyists in Washington state, not a big cattle state, than there are hay lobbyists in the country.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I have been for a long time of the opinion too. Yeah. I would love the government to stay out of it for all of the reasons that you say. I mean, you can look.
I don't want the government market distortions either, but the fact of the matter is we're taking them and we're ignoring that it's happening.
I know that's the thing that over time, it appears that the federal government is not going to stop doing these spending type or assistance type program. It doesn't seem like there's an appetite for those things to stop, even though all of us would like it.
One more thought. You just explained very clearly how disruptive these trade negotiations have been. And then these FBA payments are supposed to be addressing the disruptions caused by trade negotiations. and then hay gets nothing. So we're getting the worst of all the worlds. Penalty and the damage associated with the trade negotiations, and then none of the payments to backstop us. And then we're saying, yeah, but we don't want government anyways. But then we're getting all of the government. I don't know how we're supposed to reconcile this, but to just fix it is for the hay industry to take on corn, soybeans, wheat, cattle, dairy, and we're going to lose because we have zero industry structure to fight that fight.
I agree. And the really sad or the difficult thing, is that we're harsh on the trade policy changes simply because government is making decisions on trade policy for very different goals than I understand, for sure. The landscape is changing. The landscape's going to change. We can adapt as a business. But in the meantime, while my dad likes to say, while the administration is fighting its trade war, we're the soldiers. We're the soldiers in the trade war. And so how do you help your soldiers survive the trade war? And that's been the thing that we've certainly tried. And I've talked to you about this a bunch, that we tried, through the late spring. One day it dawned on me that the SBA Secretary of the Small Business Administration is a cabinet level position. And she actually sits in cabinet meetings 4 seats away from President Trump. And so we tried our best to try to communicate up to the administration level, to the cabinet level, that, hey, you guys are making all these changes, so be it. You're making trade policy changes, fine. You're negotiating trade deals, fine. But in the meantime, if you're going to do that, and this is so disruptive, there needs to be help. Or your business, your small businesses are going to struggle significantly. We're not Apple that can walk into the White House and say, hey, I need an exemption on iPhones coming to the US. A lot of the larger US companies that got exemptions to tariff policy, we're not those kinds of companies, right? We can't do that. We can't go do anything like that. So I think the frustrating part to see is, payments to grower, sometimes we think money doesn't really matter, I guess, from the federal government. It doesn't seem to matter. So if there is a cost.
Neither party seems to care that there's a cost.
There is a cost to it, for sure. There's a cost. But so seeing things like this that go out in the agriculture world as far as a direct payment or whatever this program is, but is not going to every product, it's confusing. And we've tried to lobby a little bit for, like in COVID, the federal government, they obviously had their, if you could prove a revenue loss or something like that, and there was some money, I can't remember the name of the program. But anyway, that was done. They also, if you had an SBA type or an XM type loan, there was the option to do interest only payments for 12 months. Or something, and they would then, just that principal would get tacked on to the end of your loan, which again, in times of chaos, that's really helpful. It's not free money. I don't need free money, but that
you pay for it eventually, right?
You're going to pay for it eventually. But that type of, idea or program seems like it would be helpful as well, because that helps more industry participants than just the grower. Back to I've never thought of it like that before, John, that it does put the hay grower, even just thinking in my area, at a disadvantage to their neighbor who just got whatever, say it's corn and they got, I don't remember what it was, $35 an acre. Well, that just paid for your spray application or paid for something that your neighbor has to pay out of pocket. The hay one is strange. We're involved in several. I've been on the Hay Growers Board for a long time. We're a member of the US FEC, and
that's
we're involved in
Forage Export Council.
US Forage Export Council. Yeah, they're a subgroup or subcommittee, basically, of the National Hay Association. I don't want to be too critical of all those groups because I certainly haven't made a huge lobbying effort myself. But the industry as a whole, you're right, is obviously not effectively lobbying to be a participant in these programs.
I truly think this is one of those cases that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and we're making the choice not to be at the table, pretending that nobody's having dinner.
That's a good way to put it, for sure.
That's we're just sticking our head in the sand saying, because we're not participating in government, there's no effect from government. We're not experiencing any adverse conditions. It's better that way.
Yeah, because you're exactly right. Because you can obviously, hindsight, this is easy to see. It wasn't easy to see at the time, but when the ethanol mandate went in place, you can see within that year, you could see the amount of alfalfa fed per cow per day in the dairy ration decreased.
Yep. Oh, actually, California stopped tracking it when it hit 2 pounds per head per day, down from 9, 10.
That was a very common number, between 8 to 12 pounds per cow per day. I mean,
Yep.
how many dairy cows are there on the West Coast?
Like 2.3 million. And that doesn't count Idaho or California, which are way bigger, way bigger dairy states.
Yeah. So say if it is 3 million, if it is 3 million, let's just use that number. If you go from two pounds of alfalfa per cow per day in the ration to 3 pounds, you're going to consume another over 500,000 tons. Having more representation from our industry within these negotiations within USDA would have a significant impact on our industry. The hard part is, how do you that takes money. Lobbying takes money. These large agricultural groups, the Corn Growers Association, all these commissions, they are raising money through the through their centralized collection points, right? And that's how they're raising money to then go fund. The Potato Commission, they're raising money through essentially the 3 large potato processors, right? And then they're going to lobbying. Hay is different because we have exporting companies for sure, which were, decent sized businesses, nowhere near the size of a grain elevator or a Simplot.
The hay export industry only represents 3 or 4% of total hay volume.
That's correct. And then the vast majority of the hay is traded by individuals.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty in our industry, is how do you gather enough money? I mean, there's been, is it NAFA that had their seed? What was that called? The checkoff program, I think.
It's a voluntary $1 per bag of alfalfa seed that we as an industry, this is one of the great things that they've done. We as an industry can use as matching funds when we go to DC and say, hey, we have a pot of money. We'd like the USDA to match it for alfalfa breeding programs.
Sure.
Or drought research, or some more of the more conventional industry issues.
No other square baler has a bigger appetite for the most demanding conditions than Krone HDP2 Big Pack. 8 knotters put more hay on every bale, and a new V-knotter design makes hanging on the bell hook almost impossible, requires fewer adjustments, and leaves no scraps behind. See it all at krone-na.com. Krone machines, built for generations.
So that's where it seems like we need to, NAFA's doing their job on the research side and all of that. We've talked about at the state, hay growers level, that we need to, we're going to make a big marketing push, and we'll talk about that with membership at the Northwest Hay Expo in a couple weeks. That's a big topic there. But maybe what needs to happen is the hay associations, the state ones, need to pool funds and need to start participating. I guess that would be one of the only ways, that you go and you raise money through your membership. You could raise money to go and lobby, because I'm thinking more about it. As much as you want government to stay out of the way, but as things are changing, if we are at a disadvantage, then you've got to go try to participate in these programs a little bit to stay viable.
If you want government to stay out of the way, you have to tell them, and we're just not even doing that.
That's true. That's true.
You weren't very far off in your 3 million dairy cows, by the way. California, 1.7 million dairy cows. Idaho, 666,000.
Okay. Why in the world do we even need an ethanol mandate? Other than we're going to make fuel, other than there's industry that's supported by it, for sure.
Absolutely.
There's processors.
And we can think back to a different political time where the U.S. was importing oil, and now we're a net exporter.
Yep.
It's just a completely different environment, where we went from a discussion around national security, growing our own food and fuel, to being an exporter where we're not reliant on that fuel at all.
Yeah. So, but you can't, again, that would impact, obviously the corn growers are not going to like that, because they're going to have less, they're going to grow less corn.
But these are the hard conversations that, this is why I'm also saying it's an impossibility, because for the hay guy to get a level playing field where we should have alfalfa back in our dairy rations, we have to take down the ethanol industry.
It's true. That doesn't seem like a very winnable.
That sounds insane to me.
That one might be hard. That one might be difficult.
That's It does. Yeah. I mean, we're playing against the global oil industry that have also bought into the ethanol industry. I mean,
But at least going and participating. So maybe, like you mentioned, participating and at least being at dinner and not pretending like there isn't a dinner.
yeah,
That's a
being at the table and not pretending that people aren't eating. Yeah, exactly.
that's a great way. And then I do think a coordinated effort of trying to, whether it's, through the other agriculture, groups as well, in trying to show that, hey, while you're making these big changes, which, I wish it would have happened this year. I don't know if things kind of smooth out and 26, gets a little bit smoother as far as, the federal government's not making huge trade policy changes. If that's the case, then, the table's already set and companies just need to go and compete. But for the next time there's this big kind of crisis or big changes, there needs to be more tools in place to help the U.S. companies. It would be nice. It would be very helpful to help companies weather significant changes like this.
I like your thought process of getting to the business side of things instead of direct payments.
I always think that's the case because, again, if you if you need a direct payment to stay viable, I'm not really sure if if your company's viable. If
Now,
you can't
now
offer,
you just made the corn guys mad.
That is true. But I mean, that's how those industries have been set for years now, for years and years and years. And so that's just part of.
There's lots of cases where, you get on deferred payments or interest only payments, or like that's actually a pretty common tool for lenders servicing tough credit.
Right.
That's
Right.
a super normal thing that could be applied very evenly.
Sure.
Very evenly. The other thing that I would support is crop insurance.
Okay.
Because we still have to deal with drought. We still have to deal with flooding. We still have to deal with Mother Nature, and asking the farmer to bear 100% of, if you're left-leaning, climate risk. If you're right-leaning, like our national security and food supply.
Sure.
I don't know that no matter how you put that, it doesn't matter. Asking the farmer to bear 100% of that and then enjoying the ups and downs associated with food prices in an environment where the farmer enjoys all of the risk is that's not going to be politically popular. So we can find some middle ground where we can say, okay, direct payments to farmers, maybe not. Subsidized crop insurance to even out some of those weather events. Okay, I can start to get behind some of that.
Sure.
I mean, I'm saying it is possible to find that middle ground, or to your point, hey, instead of let's make hay eligible for CCC loans.
Okay.
That's a completely different marketplace. And if you go over to the sugar industry and the sugar processing industry, the sugar processors are the ones that use sugar CCC loans to pay their growers.
Yeah, those types of things. If there are things that the hay industry does not have access to that other industries do, that seems like that would be one of the first things that should be that should be offered and available. I guess if we're not going and asking for it, you're not going to get it. But
I mean, even just CCC loans, so we can get low interest short-term loans to help reduce some of our interest expense. Hey, banker, I'm trying to figure out how to reduce the money I pay to you. Like, I'm working on it. I love my banker, but and especially on a personal level, but I hate the money that I have to spend with the bank.
Yep. I mean, that's we've worked with the same commercial bank for a long time and have a very good relationship with them. They've been great. They've been great to us, but it would be great to not have to borrow any money. It'd be nice to have lunch once a year and not borrow money.
Yeah. The next option is that I don't buy fertilizer this year. Truthfully, my alfalfa is not getting any fertilizer this year.
Well, that's an interesting thing you say. We've back to hay a little bit. You and I have talked to Steve Norberg about this a little bit at our, at WSU research, researcher, and very well versed in alfalfa and hay production. And we've been asking him a little bit. We've noticed the past 2 years, let me back up. For the past 10 years in the Columbia Basin, it's very rare that we would see below a 20 protein alfalfa. If you test at Dairy One, which we all of our forage tests go to Dairy One. They're the largest, database that's used around the world. And so we use them. In the early 2000s, lots of times you get 17, 18, 19. A 20 protein was really good. Right? That was very high. I think through variety selection, breeding, better agronomy work and, soil health and things, growers had gotten to where we're producing a lot of 20, 21, 22 plus protein alfalfa. And in 2024, we started seeing again in the basin like 17 protein and 18. Now, a lot of the fiber numbers were still relatively low. And so your digestibility, your RFEs were still high. You'd get an 18 protein and still like a 26 ADF, 32 NDF, and you'd get a 180. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That looks like a dryland test. But
yeah, I was going to say that's exactly the hay that I'm producing.
It just doesn't make any sense for the bait. We saw that 2024, our first cutting alfalfa was beautiful, very nice looking, good texture, soft, sweet, but proteins are lower. And again, the same thing in 25. The same thing happened in 25, where we'd be looking at, we have a lot of experience. And so you're looking at, hey, like, gosh, this should have a higher protein number. And I don't understand why. The other corresponding is that the nitrate numbers are very, very low, relatively speaking. And so kind of speaking with, protein is not byproduct, but has a huge impact on the nitrogen in the plant, right? So, and what Steve was explaining is the only thing that could be is that nutrients are lower. And so then beginning to ask farmers, everyone is fertilizing less. Everyone, because it's one of the plant's still going to grow. It's not going to grow and you're not going to get the production that you were hoping for. It's still going to grow. And so that seems to be a big place and it's having an impact on the quality, the actual test that we sell off of. That's seeming to have a big impact.
I should say, if I'm going to talk about my fertilizer program, that we're doing this from a position of strength where we have been fertilizing appropriately.
Sure.
In some cases, stockpiling some nutrients.
Yep.
So we're just going broke doing all the right things for a time that we can cut corners. And then, and now that we have a excess nutrient profile built up in our soils to where we have a bank, right?
You can afford to for a short time, right?
For a short time, we're going to draw down on that reserve and then we'll be behind again. So it's a short-term survival tactic. And I think that's where a lot of businesses are right now.
Yeah, everybody's having to make significant changes to adjust to, on the grower side, to a low price environment. And there's many like in your position, things were profitable for a while. I mean, on the farm side, money was made for a while. And so you do have a little bit of a bank, but that runs out. If this situation goes on for another year or 2 or 3 years with a kind of weaker price environment, eventually that really starts to hurt, right? Yields drop, that gets worse.
We're having the discussions of, next year's our 100th anniversary for the farm. And I don't know if we're going to make 101 or it's got to look completely different again.
Yes. And that's, unfortunately, that looks like trying to be a little bit optimistic here, John, but it is, you said cynical a little bit ago. It's a little bit difficult, just looking at your own business and not being a little bit cynical, because there are so many programs and policy changes and things that are coming that, just again to say it, it's hard not to be a little bit cynical, because they're not broad. They don't seem to be very broad in how they're approaching. The administration is difficult. It's an interesting thing. I'm concerned a little bit that the powers that be, if they allow the agricultural world to get too weak, that begins to hurt food production. I mean, it really does. Or there's money that will step in. I mean, if there's lots of farms that come up for sale, there's money that will step in at some point to buy.
It's out of cycle, though. At some point, I completely agree. It is out of cycle, though, because the reason that we had big institutional investors in agriculture was a hedge against inflation. Well, that risk came to fruition. the asset values appreciated dramatically. It looked great on everybody's balance sheet. Everybody was investing in ag land not because of the cash flow. The cash flows never made sense. You have to count on asset appreciation. That appreciation has come. And if you're ripping out tree fruit in Quincy, not picking on any one grower, I'm very sensitive to that. But you can see it from the highway, so it's easy to pick on. If you're ripping out tree fruit, that ground is no longer worth what it used to be. And if you're putting pivots on what used to be tree fruit ground, that's a step backward in asset valuation.
Hopefully that doesn't snowball, because a lot of what's helping to keep growers in an okay position is the value of their ground, on the balance sheet. And they, a lot of lenders won't let you directly borrow against that asset. You're not borrowing against it, but they know it's there as collateral. If that $15,000 per acre, ground in the basin is now worth 10 or 7 or 8, or who knows, if it's in a distressed sale, you don't know. Now that begins to change. And there's so much private equity money and venture money that's in the agricultural world. If they start to bail and exit to reduce risk, that's not a positive thing.
That gives me sweaty palms.
Well,
I mean, that's the old timers will tell you that's what happened in the 80s. It's not that the
I think so.
It's not that the institutional investors exited. That wasn't as much of a thing. There's always been that kind of stuff, but that wasn't the driver in the 80s. The fact of the matter was land values started to decrease, and when land values start decreasing, bankers start getting crazy.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's not their, I can understand that somewhat. It's not their job. They don't want to operate your business, right? It's not they don't want to be an operator. They're lender in that, but again, they've got to mitigate and control their risk. And this is not this is a large issue. I guess it could happen if we see a prolonged, kind of weakness in price. If we see weaker prices for a longer period of time, maybe we could see more of those things happen in 26 and 27 and beyond.
Back to this cash flow versus appreciation discussion. When cash flow was positive and you could count on appreciation, well, land values were great.
Right.
Now, the appreciation, nobody's going to tell you that you're getting 10%. Double digit returns is what the guys that I talk to in the ag investing world, big institutional investors, they want double digit returns, double digit hurdles. That's the vocabulary that they use, right? Nobody's booking in double digit appreciation right now. And cash flow is negative.
Yes, and even some of we've heard from some that they were looking for like a 5 or 6% return on the actual business itself, and then 5 or 6% in appreciation over a 10-year period or something like that, right? So we're not even getting that. The appreciation is done for the time being, probably, and yeah, like you mentioned, there's negative returns. So yeah, that's not because there is so much institutional money now in the agricultural world, especially in ground.
And maybe we're in a particular environment. We have to acknowledge that Washington tree fruit was part of the basket of goods for large institutional investors around the world. So let's say we can talk about dairy in New Zealand, corn and soybean ground in Brazil, palm oil in Indonesia, and wine in California and apples in Washington. That's how $100 billion investment companies allocated their 2 to 3% to agriculture.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
That's how that happened. So what I'm trying to avoid here is angry phone calls from bankers saying, "Don't talk about land values."
Sure.
What I am saying is the world has changed.
Yep.
We are in a drastically different environment for land values where they are not appreciating, where cash flow is negative. That's different. So when I hear somebody say, "Oh, somebody will step in and buy it," my question is, if the institutional investors are still saying, "I want double-digit returns because I have to do better than what I can get in the marketplace,"
then the actual cost of the underlying asset or operation has to be less.
Yes.
That's the say that under your breath. That's the say under your breath quietly.
Yeah. I mean, these are the real problems in agriculture.
Sure.
And it's particularly acute in Washington State because of the influence from tree fruit.
I think so. I've got good friends that are in that industry, and it sure doesn't sound fun. It doesn't sound like a fun thing at all. And then, yeah, all of the agriculture, we mentioned here a little while ago that, all of agriculture is decreasing, and for other reasons, famously, Tyson is closing, they closed one of their big processing facilities, and they idled another one back to less than 50%. That's not so much driven by lack of demand, but they're just lower cattle numbers, right? There's fewer cattle in the U.S. being killed just because of the herd size, and so they decreased. Which that again, that's a facility that employed people, should be generating revenue. That's not.
Let's
That
bring.
one's decreasing.
I love that we have come back to this. We need to put a bow tie on this, or else we're going to talk for days. This idea of our cattle industry processing capacity, we can tie that directly back to our hay industry and our hay industry processing capacity.
Yep.
It's not healthy for the slaughter facilities to run empty or half full.
Right. It's not.
And when they do, they get closed. Our hay export industry is in the same spot.
Yes, there are facilities that are running, 20%, 30% of what would, nobody truly ever ran at 100% capacity.
Yeah, because what is 100%? Is it 24 hours a day, 6 days a week? Is it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? What is 100%, right?
I mean, even I have two big machines, and even at our peak, we'd run 3 shifts, right? I remember Don saying something similar, right? I mean, he said something similar to that. So, and I'm talking 30% of their normal capacity, 40% of their normal capacity. That's just
not peak capacity.
Not peak of their normal capacity. You just can't operate, which again, if you just simply take across the board, there's 25% less export demand, right, for hay. That means everybody now is running at 75%. Well, there's some that are going to be able to achieve 90%, which means others can only run at 60. And there's more. That is, and again, some companies can retool, resize, depending, but not everyone. Not everybody can do that, which is what's happening. Eventually, that will create a little bit healthier environment for the export processor, which is needed because if we're going to survive, we've got to rebuild. We have to rebuild. I'm not complaining, just strictly speaking from our part of the market. We're going through we've gone through some of that excess capacity coming out of production, which is making it a little bit healthier. We can charge a little bit better rate to process. And so hopefully in 26, that continues to improve. And then, as a whole, I always try to talk from the grower position. I have no idea what's going to change that. I truly have no idea what's going to change from the price. And we talk to a lot of farmers. A lot of farmers get very upset that, well, you're just not paying enough for the product. And the only thing we can tell people is we have the costs in our business that we need to run. Obviously, we have real costs and a margin you need, and we have to put that between what we can sell for, and that eventually means what we can purchase. And we can only sell for so much, right? On the global scale. There's other people in our industry that feel kind of the opposite. We need to pay the farmer a profitable price, and then we have to go force our customers to pay our price, which, goodness, I just don't. Myself personally, I don't know how that works. I don't know how you would actually accomplish that.
If it were that easy, they should just go do it.
That's what we always joke and kind of say. Well, the reason, John, it makes some of my competitors not very happy, but the reason that they can't do that is because I'm selling too cheap. I mean, the number of times we hear that, the number of times I hear that from people.
You're cheating.
That's exactly right. We're just undercutting everybody, but. I mean, that it's a global market more and more often. I mean, there's hay from areas of the world coming into the markets we traditionally sell to that we've never heard of before, right? Over the past 5 years, there's more hay from other places in the world entering the market. So you have to, you just have to get better and better. And I was saying about the farmer is I really don't know what the answer to that would be. Right now, it sure seems like we're producing more than there's demand for. And so prices are low. Prices are below cost of production in many ways, and eventually that will root its way out. Eventually that will work itself out as people can't, or hopefully we do see some changes to where we see an increase in demand for U.S. agricultural goods. I hope so. I'm hoping that the trade agreement with China, when it's eventually signed, I mean, that's announcements are one thing, right? Announcements by the administration, and not to be overly critical, not what I'm intending to, but announcements are different from the actual ratifying of an agreement with terms in it. That usually takes 18 to 24 months, right? I mean, there's just like a lot of people don't know, the announcement in 2017 after President Trump was in office for 9 months, when there was a deal announced with China, it took 17 or 18 months for that to be signed. Now, the announcement began to have market changes. The market began to move around it, but the real deal
But until the tariff schedules change and the businesses have time to adapt, I mean, we're talking years, not months.
It takes time. So that hopefully we do see, China and other countries, they have real demand they have large demand for agricultural goods. So we're hoping that the administration truly is trying to use our purchasing power from them to be able to negotiate that, no, you need to buy more U.S. products. We're not going to continue to allow your stuff to come here if you're going to buy all your soybeans from Argentina and Brazil. I'm hoping that truly is the case, that there is some high-level negotiation that's happening to force that. That would benefit us greatly. I'm hoping that's the case. It just takes time. And in the meantime, the turmoil is real in the meantime.
Scott, this has been a wonderful conversation. We get to converse like this quite frequently, and I sure do appreciate those regular touch points. But to put it on the podcast is wonderful, and I look forward to more angry phone calls.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It's a tough time, and I always hope that people are truly trying to be honest with all their different business partners and with the industry, and not trying to talk their book. Everybody does a little bit, but you have to try to be honest, because that will really help people truly position. If things are not looking very good, you can't say they are. That's not helpful. That's not helpful to anybody. So I think there are some positives to come, but it's going to be tough for a little while still, I think.
Put your hard hats on and manage well.
That's right.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you to Krone for sponsoring this podcast. Without your support, none of this would happen. And shout out to Nick Palmieri at Palmieri Sound for making us sound like geniuses.